I spoke with Aurélie Godard, who is team leader in Gaza for Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders. And she was in a hospital in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, and she told us how close the fighting is to that medical facility.
So it depends on the moment. It's like everyone probably knows that there's no real safe place in Gaza. Rafah remains a safer place, let's say, not safe, but safer place. So we can hear explosions from time to time here and there. There was one very loud a few minutes ago, because that was 500 meters away, apparently from the hospital. We're still waiting for more information. We can hear them from time to time when they're targeting specific places. But the front line is a bit further away, but we can definitely hear explosions quite regularly. The ground fight, though, is further away, so we don't have these noises. But yeah, like tonight, for example, was louder than usual because even the patients went to the windows to open them up. We keep them slightly open just for blast mitigation, for the glasses not to break open. The patients who are unfortunately very used to these sounds tonight were, well, surprised enough to go and open the windows. So even in Rafah, and despite the extremely high concentration of people, we are talking about 1.3 million, 1.5 million living in the city. Clearly, it's not a safe place in Gaza Street.
One tragic thread that we see in crisis zones around the world is the impact that conflict has on women and children. And the UN says 2 mothers are killed in Gaza every hour. Some estimate 10,000 infants and children have died since this war began. Aurélie, why are we seeing such horrific numbers?
So there are probably several reasons explaining that. For the children, the Gaza population is extremely young. Half of the population is children, basically. And the difference that we can see here as well is that there's a lot of bombardments. So they definitely affect, irrespective of your gender, your age, if you're a soldier or not. And then they particularly affect civilians. And there are a lot of children in Gaza, but as well women, just because they keep trying to survive, and they're caught into the bombings, the shelling. And what you have to know as well is that when it's bombardment, explosion, then you can be affected in multiple ways. You can be very close from the explosive device or further away, but you can be burned. You can have what we call shrapnel, the small pieces entering into your body. You can have fractures, you can have massive wounds. So there are many ways to be wounded. And then it definitely affects as well the most vulnerable population. The children are more vulnerable, so definitely, unfortunately, more likely to suffer from severe injuries. And so are the women, especially the pregnant ones, for example. They're as well more fragile patients in general. And then they can die from the lack of access to care, because there are very few hospitals being functional, being entirely functional. Access to care is extremely difficult, depending where you live. Is it more or less of a safe place? Can you travel to the hospital? The ambulances are not enough to cover the needs. So having access to health structures is difficult, and these health structures have not been functioning either not at all, because they have been destroyed, the health system collapsed, and the remaining ones are not tailored to absorb these kids. Like in Rafah, for example, the main hospital where you can deliver is Emirati Hospital. But Rafah was 250,000 people before, so the hospital is proportionate to this population, not to the 1.3 million, 1.5 million that is currently living in Rafah. So definitely the few health structures remaining a bit functional are overwhelmed. So there are unfortunately many reasons not to have access to care, and then to die either from your injuries or just from the lack of access to care.
Aurélie, the UN says Gaza is the most dangerous place in the world to be a child right now. Can you tell me, what are aid agencies, advocates doing on the ground to alleviate some of that threat, given there is still fighting ongoing as we speak?
So I think since the very beginning, we've all been asking for a ceasefire. It's the only way to get the humanitarian aid entering Gaza, entering in a quantity that is enough to meet the needs. And unhindered humanitarian aid is more than necessary, because there are, of course, the medical needs, but even access to food is not secured. Access to safe water is not secured. The living conditions are extremely disastrous. People are living in shelters. The luckiest one have a real tent, but unfortunately, many people are living in like makeshift tents from pieces of plastic assembled together in a very precarious environment. It's wintertime, it's raining, it's windy, it's cold. So the needs are just gigantic. Medical ones, of course, but all the basic needs are not covered at all. So the ceasefire is the only way that this humanitarian aid can enter and can at least try to cope with the basic needs of the population. But otherwise, there's no way to be walking safely and even trying to match the needs is impossible with the security context right now. So we really need a ceasefire to be able to support the Gaza people.
Amongst all of the death, there is also new life. The UN estimates there are about 50,000 pregnant women currently living in Gaza. Can you describe what childbirth is like for women in the enclave right now?
So the most lucky one will deliver in a hospital if they have access to it, if they have time to access to it. And even in this scenario, they will be sent back to their shelter, I wouldn't say home, right after a vaginal delivery. If they have a C-section, they will be monitored for a few hours, not even up to 12 hours, and they will be sent back to their shelter as well, just because there are so many women waiting for a bed that you can't keep them. And that's again if you're lucky enough to reach the hospital. But there are as well women delivering in the shelters, in their tents, in public places, just because that's where they live, they have no access to care. So delivery, hygiene, postnatal care is extremely reduced, almost impossible to have access to. The same for the babies, the newborns. It's extremely difficult to deliver and bring to birth a baby in a safe environment here. So they basically deliver where they can, and then they go back to their survival environment right after the delivery.